This podcast is recorded at Windsor Public Library, which sits on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of First Nations and includes the Ojibway, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. We respect and honor First Nations' long-standing relationship to the land along the Detroit River in what is now called Windsor, Essex County.
Welcome back to Stories of Windsor, a podcast focusing on the rich history of our community by the river. On this episode, Carla and I are very excited to chat with Walter Petrichyn, a local filmmaker, soon to be author. On April 15th, 2026, Walter will be hosting a screening of his short film, Canada's Steel City, Ojibway, at the local history branch. We wanted to give Walter the opportunity to highlight this project, as well as shed some light on the lesser-known history of the former township of Ojibway. Welcome, Walter. It's such an honor to have you join us.
A huge honor to be on the podcast. I'm a big fan of your work, and I'm so delighted to be here, so thank you.
Thanks a lot, Walter. Before we get started with our questions we have for you about Ojibway, the steel town, I wanted to make this statement that when we refer to Ojibway throughout this discussion today, we are talking specifically about the history of the former steel town of Ojibway that developed on the outskirts of Windsor in the early 20th century. This is not to be confused with the indigenous peoples known as the Ojibway. Walter's research deals specifically with the development of the town of Ojibway around a steel manufacturing company. Would you say that's fair, Walter? Like that covers it?
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
Okay, great. So why don't we start off, before we delve into Ojibway, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your educational and professional background?
Yeah, so thank you. So I was born and raised in Windsor, and, with my undergraduate, I was studying political science, communication, media, and film at the University of Windsor. And I think this local history sort of interest really kind of slowly developed for me, and I could pinpoint certain moments in my life. Like there used to be a bi-weekly news publication called an alternative newspaper called The Urbanite, and I wrote for that back in 2014. And I could recall one of the articles I wrote then was about the Jackson Park band shell. And it was interesting because I never really thought of pursuing local history, but I recognized in doing something like that, I was like, oh, that is local history, that one, piece of architecture in the park, and it conveys the Emancipation Proclamation and the all that incredible Black history that we have in Windsor, and also the Fireman's Field Day and Battle of the Bands, and it's like that one piece of architecture conveys all of that throughout decades and whatnot. So I really do think my life changed when I got a summer job. It was 2014 at Museum Windsor, and that really gave me the opportunity to heavily dedicate time to doing historical work. And as I was pursuing my graduate degree, this would have been in New York City at the New School. It was in a program called Design in Urban Ecologies. It was basically all urbanism focused. So we had an assignment in class to talk about like what's something that fascinates you. It could be the city you're from or whatever. And it had to be that exposure working at the museum that summer, because I did write about the former steel town of Ojibway and the rectangular grid, a steel map. It was sort of like I had the idea, the interest of the idea was all the way back then. But many, many years later, in 2019, when I was scanning maps that summer also at the museum, I came and I looked at the map again, and I was thinking, oh, that's so interesting. And I was in this place, the local history branch, asking Mary Lou for maps and anything you guys had about the former municipality. So sort of like a quick summary of why I'm doing these projects.
Kind of feels like you're having a full circle moment with coming back here and showing your film at the local history branch where you started your research.
100%, yeah.
And we reap the benefits because
Absolutely.
I think it's a cool film. And why don't you tell us about your film project, which is related to the history of the former steel town? What is it about, and what was the process like to make the film?
Sure. Basically, for whoever would come to the library to watch it, what it entails is I like to think of it as an archive film. So like you got newspaper clippings that are animated. You have historical photographs that have the Ken Burns style, so it does that nice like left to right pan. You have some archival films that were accessed from Library and Archives Canada, including this incredible footage from the 1950s of what it did look like inside a steel factory site at the former town of Ojibway. I can't believe I found that footage, but it's part
Yeah,
of it.
I would say that's probably the coolest part of the whole
Agreed.
film. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
just a gem.
Agreed.
And by the way, when I was up at Library and Archives Canada, how they had it to researchers, they wheeled out the old TV. So I was watching this cassette tape of like I don't know what, and I think sometimes as a researcher, you really don't know like what you're gonna walk into. So there were definitely some like, okay, that didn't work, and I'm like, I can't believe that exists. So
Mhm.
sometimes like you do have to leave the city of Windsor to go find Windsor history in other archives.
And when you find that gem, that diamond in the rough, it's like a fist pump moment. It's like, yes, like archaeology is the same, where like it's 99% boredom and 1% excitement when you find that thing that you didn't even know you wanted or needed. So I feel you on that.
All of those items of archival stuff, plus text, because I want to bring people. It's sort of like a chronological story of. I talk a little bit about the 1890s of this fellow named Daniel Scotton. Basically, all the property that he owned ultimately did become the site of what became the town of Ojibway. So the key dates I'm saying is like 1913 to 1966 when it became part of the city of Windsor through annexation. There is a little bit of history about up to the present as to what's going on with the site, but I think one of the key elements of it was how that area of land was used in terms of land speculation, in terms of people purchasing this as an investment. And there was a lot of that going on by investors all across North America, which as I keep revisiting the story, I think it's a key element, a key basic principle of what this story is about.
So you mentioned that your film is primarily text based. So as a filmmaker, what led you to make that choice rather than have it even narrated with a voiceover? Tell us a little bit about your film making choices.
Yeah, and if I'll be completely honest with you, I believe you could access it on Canopy with your library card. So there's a film. It's called Dawson City Frozen Time by Bill
Yes.
Morrison. I'm deeply inspired by that film.
Okay.
So it's sort of like, you take an influence and then you kind of try to integrate it to become your own. That was one influence that has deeply impacted how I went about in making Canada's Steel City Ojibway. I suppose the difference between mine and his or whatever is that there is footage as to some of the sites present day, so that's also integrated into the film as well. But I'm not gonna lie. If you watch that film, that's a direct influence towards me to be like, I want to make it in this way.
So you found that film, the Dawson City film, very impactful when you watched it, and so you wanted to present your film about Ojibwe in the same manner, essentially.
Yeah, and I mean this isn't a first for me too. So I had a short film expressing Toronto that was screened at WIF and the Toronto Indie Doc Fest in 2018. And that one is about the Gardiner Expressway, the elevated link, and City Council deciding whether to demolish or rebuilding the elevated link connecting the Don Valley Parkway in 2015. And if you watch that one, there's no people. All you could hear are people's voices, but you see the infrastructure throughout the entirety of the film. And there's a film by Peter, forgive me, I might pronounce the guy's name incorrectly, Peter Ramond, I believe. He made an entire film about a pipeline in Alaska. So exact same thing. I was so inspired by that film that I went about doing this Toronto infrastructure film inspired by topophilia. That's what that film was called.
That's very cool. And so you've expressed your experience as a filmmaker, which is very cool, very exciting, and totally foreign to me. Um, I've never dabbled in that. But you are also working on a book related to the history of Ojibway, the steel town. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that in terms of the scope of the book and what the process has been like to write a full manuscript and try to acquire a publisher?
Yeah, so thank you. I started it in 2020. This was back when there was this organization online. I now know it's no longer functioning. It's called NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. I wasn't invested yet, like to committing to a full manuscript. So what I did was I wrote 1,000 words about the subject and then I put it aside. But then what I found was that the following year, I just found myself ordering items from Archives Ontario. I made my appointment to go up to Toronto, to York University, to spend a week looking at paper documents, various ephemera, you name it. I already had a hunch how big this story was, that it may not suffice just for a podcast episode. Just for more context, I did produce an episode of the former steel town of Ojibway when I got this funding from the City of Windsor's Arts Culture Heritage Fund for a local history podcast. I called it Life in a Border Town. So I did about 8 episodes, and the Steel Town episode was one of the 8. And that's what I meant, where it's like I went to the local history branch and I was like, what do you guys have, right? So to my knowledge, there is no book that you could pick up about the former municipality of Ojibway, Ontario. I think it was something that just sort of like, it kind of kept coming up to be like, well, you're participating in NaNoWriMo. I did a podcasting class in 2019 and they even recommended me for it to be a book. So it was something that sort of like synced its way into me, where in 2021, I wrote about 6,000 words of NaNoWriMo then. And then I think that's where I committed myself to see this thing out, however long it takes. Where I'm at right now is that I'm just trying to do one final revision. I've already hired an editor through Reedsy. She was incredible. She helped me so much. She did many, many edits with me. I had to clear tens of thousands of edits with her. I went through 4 beta readers, and I want to thank each of them for taking the time to read through my manuscript, providing me feedback. So yeah, really, I'm just at the phase where I'm just trying to survive the last, final read through, revision. I'm really trying not to integrate any more research, but I think if anyone could attest to this, the research really never ends. So I think it's sort of like a compromise you have to have with yourself to be like, okay, you could look at it if you want, but you don't lose your focus. The focus should be the final revision. Make an index and then submit it to a publisher. That's basically where I'm at.
I think we had a conversation not long ago where you said, like, I'm at the point where I need to stop. Like, I just need to stop and focus on what I have, which I think is good advice because any researcher does kind of go off the rails sometimes when you're like, ooh, there's an avenue I didn't explore.
That is definitely the hardest part, is stopping research. And you have to stop it at some point because you have to synthesize what you have found and find the narrative, find connections. And if you keep adding little bits and pieces, then that gets even muddier. So yes, that's a very big challenge. And please, please make an index. That would just be a dream, because that just helps our patrons so much when they access books here in the library.
I have a rough one, yeah.
So the book, in terms of like the scope, the period, what period of history does it cover? Is it still 1913 to 1960s roughly, or?
Yeah, so like similar to the film, the book, mostly does the same format, I guess you could say. Like I still do dedicate some time in the 1890s to cover the stories of Daniel Scotton and the Yaquis. And there are years leading up to 1913, which are very important to the story for ultimately the steel town of Ojibway. But yeah, I really do try with the 1966 to kind of do a hard end there. I do have an afterward chapter that brings things to the present. I kind of think of that as, here I am alive in 2026. It'd be kind of weird to just be like, oh, it's done in 1966 and that's it. I think of the role of an afterword or whatever is to be like, okay, this is my own lived experience of what is happening to this subject matter I'm writing about that predates me. That's really, in terms of time, that's how it exists. There is a little bit about the Pontiac conspiracy, so a little bit of that time period too. But
So the afterword will touch on, if anybody's been paying attention to the news, the site where the steel town used to be is now Ojibway Park, or a portion of it is Ojibway Park. And it's under review to become Canada's first national urban park. I love it when history connects with the modern day and shows how relevant history and our past is to the present day. So that's really cool.
if I may, I believe it would be following the Rouge National Urban Park. So that one's in
Oh,
Toronto.
is that the first?
Yeah, to my
Okay.
understanding. Yeah,
Thank you.
no problem. No.
We already kind of dabbled into this about how you got interested in the history of Ojibway, the steel towns. It was as an employee at Museum Windsor and checking out maps and just being inspired by that. Do you have like a defining moment where you just like felt like I have to pursue this? And also, how was the name Ojibway selected for this steel town?
To answer the first part of your question, I think it was that in between period of returning back to Windsor from Archives Ontario, spending a week doing research about this subject matter and thinking to myself, this thing really is something much beyond, and I think the world of podcasting. But like sometimes when you think of a medium like a book, like I think of it as an opportunity to really expand in the printed format something that, and of course I know there's podcasters that do very long form history work, and much respect and kudos to them, but maybe it's also the graduate student in me too. Like I've written a thesis, and I figured, okay, well, I guess if we don't have it in our collection of like local history and libraries and stuff, like maybe I'll just step up and contribute in that way. And to answer the second part of your question, I've seen multiple accounts in newspaper articles back in the day where basically former Detroit tobacco businessman, entrepreneur Daniel Scotton, when he purchased his property in Sandwich West Township, he was essentially, I like to like nickname him Hiram Walker of the West End. Of course, his enterprise was much more limited in what it was Ojibwa then. And just to give a time scale or a frame of time, 1890s was when he was doing this. So there's articles that you could find in the digital newspaper archive, the Windsor Public Library, where basically some locals in that region were calling it Scottonville. And Daniel Scotton was very apprehensive about that. He was not into that idea at all. So instead, he was suggesting we should name it after the Indigenous woman who warned the British officers during the Pontiac conspiracy. So basically saving their lives by letting them know there was going to be a impending attack by Chief Pontiac. So that story, basically the Essex Historical Society also mentioned that story as well. And that really kind of led this effort to, instead of that little area to be named Scottonville, to be named Ojibwa. And, you can see on old maps, this little tiny little hamlet, little village, that's where it is, Ojibwa. For a very tiny brief period, it was called Pontiac, but there was a lot of opposition to that too. And then ultimately it went back to Ojibwa, and then the Y was added for it to be more authoritative, according to Steel officials.
Do you think there'll be another project that you'll see if it's easier the second time around?
It's funny you say that because so I had a screening of this film at the museum, and I got to meet some lovely land surveyors, and they showed me some incredible maps. And one of them sent me like an idea. It was like, oh, maybe you want to check this out, maybe as a book. And I'm like, oh my God, don't do this to me.
Yeah.
This is too much.
Finish one first, yeah.
Yeah, finish
Yeah,
one
yeah.
first. Yes. So you mentioned a few of the repositories that you've collected your research, including us here at the local history branch. Can you tell us a little bit more about where you've collected your research, how you approached research, and did you conduct any oral interviews to complement the documentary information that you collected?
Yeah, so I recognize that I haven't done any oral history interviews. Maybe it's my own gap in my own research. I think it's one of those things where, like, even though I don't have that, I want to believe I compensated with all the other stuff that I have. And I know so many people in the historical field in Windsor miss him greatly. The late Michael Fish. He helped me out so much at the archives site downtown. To be more specific with you, he showed me land deeds and the town of Ojibway council minutes book. And even the bylaws too. He was showing me some maps as well. So that was a lot for me to kind of sink my teeth in, and that's definitely has been integrated in my story. In addition to that, I know I did mention to you that I was at Library Archives Canada, and it's such a obscure find, but it really is the bulk of one of my chapters. It's basically the private papers of this officer who, like, patrolled the area of the former town of Ojibway. It's such an incredible find because it's a reflection of what the Department of the Head of Immigration was in Canada in 1913. And basically, you have so much happening. I'm talking like about like American business owners who bring their clients over to Canada because they want to show them these lots and they want to sell them these lots and stuff. And it's the head of immigration saying, you can't do that, you know? And it's such an obscure find. I doubt that I would have been able to find anything like this if I was just trying through newspaper archives. I want to give a shout out to Inc. Our Digital World. Those guys are phenomenal. University of Windsor. God bless the folks at the Marsh Historical Collection. I did go there for a little bit. Burton Historical Collection in Detroit. I did make a trip over there too. Some stuff at even Museum Windsor, some incredible photographs. Oh, and then one other thing, Library of Congress Chronicling America. It's such an incredible resource. I have all these like obscure American newspapers that I get I cite from, because part of this story too is there's these real estate agents that are selling town of Ojibway property or property near the town of Ojibway, and they're selling it in places like in Indiana. They're selling it in Pennsylvania. And thank God for that website, because I'm just like typing in these keywords. Like, I don't have to go to some archive in Indiana, even though I'm sure that's fun. But, it's like the convenience of just doing this in your, bedroom or something. So that too was a huge archival source that went towards this whole thing.
With all these sources and repositories in mind, what is probably the most interesting thing or surprising thing you've discovered about Ojibway through the sources?
I know I mentioned that film footage from the 1950s, and this was when Dosco from Nova Scotia purchased the plant. That would have been in the 1930s.
Dominion Steel, Dosco, right?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's phenomenal film footage, but I guess more so for the book aspect. I think some articles really kind of show the scale of the project. And what I mean by that, like, I think about like articles from the Wall Street Journal saying that, oh, this is a bluff, this is not legitimate, this is speculation. So I think having these outsider voices just kind of observing and making their own claims, I think that's really important. I think there is this, what do you call it? Maybe like a hometown bias or something, where it's like, oh, it's local. We got to invest in our economy and stuff. It can't fail. How could it fail? Millions of dollars has been poured into this project. So I think with looking at, again, these outsider voices that like are in the historical record, I think about this one guy. He worked for a paper from Ottawa. He was like an urban planning advisor, and he would put out articles about like what's going on with like urban development across in cities across the country and stuff. And he was looking at what was happening at the town of Ojibway. And he was saying that the United States Steel Corporation was trying to control the planning of the area, the town planning, but they were not able to. And there's these incredible quotes saying like it's like the speculation of the worst kind. It's leading to slum property, stuff like that. And this guy is calling it out, like, I'm telling you, like 1921. And this is like at least 10 years prior to the actual plant shutting down indefinitely. Having these voices that are very critical about the project that I was able to find through I think even that when I found through the Internet Archive, that was really important to have a well-adjusted or a kind of well-rounded observation of what this thing was and how it was developing.
I think it validates the research too, because you're looking at both sides of it.
And not only that, but these sources are coming from well outside of the local community,
Mm-hmm.
which puts Windsor into perspective. And sometimes, I think you mentioned earlier the phrase hometown bias. I think there's kind of hometown bias locally that Windsor's kind of a small town, not much going on, not much in our history. But it's moments like that when you realize it is connected to a much larger global community, an international community with the United States. And so I think those resources that you mentioned are a prime example of that. So we've discussed your film project, we've discussed your manuscript. Can you tell us what was the most challenging thing about producing both of those? And is one harder than the other? Or do you prefer one over the other?
Yeah, I'll quote the late great. She was my former documentary film teacher. Her name is Deanna Camille. And she said she was from Toronto, and she said you have to have cinematic language when you're making a film, right? So I think I know I keep mentioning that 1950s footage, but like sometimes like that's what you need, when you're making a film, If I gave the viewers simply text for the duration, it's not a film. I had to be very on the ball, I guess, of like, okay, how much of it is text? How much of it is moving images? How, how, and then like that's a historical moving images and current moving images. Recognizing that was really important for something like this book. Well, I think it goes back to the beast of always researching, right? Making peace with the fact that it's like, okay, it doesn't have that item from the vaults of the US Steel Archive. It doesn't. And I have no plans of going there. I don't even know where it is, to be honest.
I
um,
guess it'd be Indiana, but
right. Yeah. Or you have a great point, Carla. I'm not planning to go to Gary, Indiana at
Yeah.
any time soon, but that story of that city is so influential on the town of Ojibway. So I think there are
It
these.
served as a model, essentially.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are these doors as a researcher you have to close yourself. Maybe that's the best way I could put it. It's just saying the story is done. The story is done. Maybe that one last one at the archive site downtown, but but
Not spoken from experience, right
yeah.
there.
But yeah, I think that's controlling that is key because you'll be quicker to getting it done and getting it, fingers crossed, published and then getting in the hands of people, right?
Absolutely. And that is, it's something that when people read history books, the average person's maybe not thinking about that, but it is an important aspect of writing a history book in that the author should be laying out in the beginning of their manuscript the scope of what they are going to cover and what they're not going to cover, because that's equally important. And when you're upfront about that kind of stuff, then it sets an honest tone for the rest of the book.
And I think another thing is refining, like, sure, it's a story about the former municipality of Ojibwe, but it's like, if it's a story about like a city, a town, I'm sure when Pat Broad wrote about the river and the land, he's not adding every single thing about the current city of Windsor. And that's the thing, right? It's just like cities have existed for decades and decades, and it's like, is it really necessary for me to write about a fellow in Brighton Beach who took his life and then using that as prohibition because the mayor of the town of Ojibwe wanted to make this municipality a dry town? I think it's making calls like that where it's like, is that part like necessary in here? I know.
Yeah, what can and cannot fit in the narrative.
I love a footnote for that, though. When it's a real juicy piece and you that can't fit it in, just put in a footnote.
Yeah.
So, what do you wish more people knew about the history of Ojibwe and its significance to the broader history of Windsor and Essex County?
And like one thing I don't know if it's still on their website, but I want to give a shout out to the Ojibwe Nature Center, because on their website they had this overlaid map, so you could see the map would have looked like in 1913, and then they overlaid it on the present Ojibway Prairie complex. So I think one huge takeaway is that if this plant was successful, and we went down the path as I guess something like a Gary, Indiana, there would be no Black Oak Heritage Park. I would highly doubt there would be even an Ojibway Park, and even Tallgrass Prairie, the Prairie Reserve, even like Spring Garden, because if you look at these old maps, they had planning for these vast roads, and recognizing the great work that various naturalists have done over the span of decades to preserve these areas. That's the key thing. And I think in the early 20th century, it was almost as if we were going down a different route, with all of that urban development. So I think that's one huge takeaway. And of course, it's a cautionary tale for the 20th century, but we can't predict the future. So, maybe it could be a good story to reflect on as we consider our own city's relationship with even more urban development in the future, weighing out the pros and cons. And I hope that answered your question.
Yeah. We have one more question for you, and we're hoping you can touch on it. In what ways is the history of Ojibway connected to other notable persons, places, or events in Windsor's past?
Oh, in Windsor's past. I think sometimes my brain just keeps shooting off oh, America, but there are plenty. So O.E. Fleming, Oscar Ernest Fleming. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the last mayor of the town of Windsor and the first mayor of the city of Windsor. So this guy, he's kind of like a through line of this entire story. So he was working with Daniel Scotton on securing properties along the Detroit River. And then he was with this project. He did pass away before the town was annexed to become the part of the city of Windsor. But there are a lot of moments where this guy was acting as a barrister for the U.S. Steel, representing the town of Ojibway, and that he would go on the record and talk about the town and stuff too. So that's one. You have former mayor of Windsor, Dave Kroll. You have these incredible quotes of him using the town of Ojibway as sort of like a political tool to say, oh, don't vote for the Conservatives because they put out all these steel workers at the plant. We lost 400, 500 workers at the plant because of the opposing party. There's these incredible quotes from the former mayor about the steel town. Maybe a more underrated one is William Woolat. This guy was the first mayor of the town of Ojibway, which, by the way, they were appointed. At that time in 1913, it might have been the only municipality in Ontario that were appointed to the town council. Real estate folks. So Healy Page Chappis. You have Albert Healy, he was a Windsor lawyer. You have Leo Page. This guy was one of the co-founders of the Goodfellows. He started a French knitting company with the French women who lived at Ojibwa. And then, of course, before forming this real estate syndicate. And the last one was Chappis, Albrecht Chappis. This fellow, he caught a lot of muskrats, one of the early settlers of this town. So Healy Page Chappis, this syndicate, real estate syndicate. You look up real estate ads in 1913, it's either them or Gundy and Gundy, which these guys are not Windsor guys, but they came to Windsor. And I'm telling you, the way that they sold ads were very interesting. They would say stuff like, we are not fly-by-night speculators. We are men known to you all. You could trust us because of the land deals we made in this city and stuff like that. So they really use their own local reputation, like putting it on the line to be like, you could, this is no speculation, buy these lots. So those are some off the top of my head.
That's very cool. I'm thinking back to what you said kind of earlier, the founder of Ojibway, Scotton. Scotton as the Hiram Walker of Ojibway. And when I watched your film, I did think that to myself, and how in the 1880s, 1890s, that was kind of happening in Windsor, not just with Hiram Walker, but also here in Sandwich Town with Jules Robinette, with his brickworks, and he starts building houses for the workers who work at the brickworks. So like it's kind of a trend locally at least, and I find that an interesting connection as well. That continued with the Ojibway project.
And I think another thing that only found in the archives, because I highly doubt I would have found this online. So I went to the Burton Historical Collection, and there I found an article because, like, one thing that kept bothering me was that why is Daniel Scotton doing this, you know? So I did find a quote. It wasn't like directed to him, but it was basically saying, like, these are what the friend said that he said. So basically, he said, I'm doing this because I want capitalists to come to this area, you know, to settle. You know, he had these plans of like a tobacco plant and stuff, but of course it's like you have the plans and then you pass away, and then your children are like, nah, we don't want to do that. You know, they were like in the process of selling his like property because they didn't want to deal with his farm and, you know, all these workers and stuff, you know. But I agree with you. Yeah, it's sort of like he was kind of doing the equivalent at that part of the township, you know.
Yeah, these like kind of business owners that like end up boosting the whole town around their business. So very fascinating.
And one last one was the Yakis. I know that was a very a prominent name in that area. What we know today of Ojibway Park was formerly Yaki Bush.
Yes.
Those ones. But actually, they're not Windsorites. They're Detroiters.
Walter, thank you very much for being here today. It was a really great conversation. And to our listeners out there, just a reminder that Walter Petrichyn will be here at the local history branch on April 15th at 6:30 p.m. screening his short film, Canada's Steel City, Ojibway. After the screening, he will be taking questions and answers from the audience, and we hope that you all attend. And is there anything else you have, Erica?
No, I think this has been wonderful, Walter. Thank you so much. If they can't see your film at the local history branch, is there another opportunity for them to view it?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind like getting in contact and, you know, providing like a private link or something.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks so much, Walter. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be on the podcast. Thanks.